hadn't felt this nervous in years. Standing outside Le Ciel, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, I smoothed down my midnight blue dress for what must have been the 20th time. Tonight was important. It was Arnold's mother's 60th birthday celebration, and despite our complicated relationship, I was determined to make an effort. Family peace matters, right? God, I should have known better. The restaurant's facade gleamed with understated elegance, all glass and warm lighting that promised comfort and sophistication. I'd spent hours getting ready, choosing the perfect outfit, the right jewelry. Nothing too flashy that would give Morgan ammunition, but elegant enough to fit in with her country club friends. "You've got this, Mary," I whispered to myself as I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The soft jazz and gentle murmur of conversation washed over me as I stepped into the foyer, the scent of expensive perfume and gourmet food mingling in the air. The maître d', a tall man with impeccable posture and a carefully neutral expression, approached with a polished smile. "Good evening, madam. How may I assist you this evening?" "I'm here for the Porter birthday celebration." "Morgan Porter's party?" I smiled, warmly, shaking off the slight tremble in my hands. 7 years of marriage to Arnold, and his mother still made me feel like an imposter. The maître d' consulted his tablet, fingers skimming over the screen with practiced efficiency. His brow furrowed slightly. Porter. He looked up, that professional smile never wavering. "I'm terribly sorry, madam, but I don't see your name on the reservation list." I blinked. There must be some mistake. I'm Mary Porter. Arnold Porter's wife? Let me check again. Another minute passed, his fingers tapping the screen. "I do see the Porter party, but I'm afraid your name isn't included in the guest list." My stomach dropped. "That's impossible. It's my mother-in-law's birthday. My husband is already here." Perhaps there was a miscommunication? His voice was gentle, but I could see the awkwardness in his eyes. "Would you like me to call over to the table to verify?" Before I could answer, I heard a familiar laugh, Morgan's distinct, controlled titter that she reserved for public spaces. I turned toward the sound and spotted them across the restaurant. Arnold, his 2 sisters, their husbands, and Morgan, herself, holding court at a large round table beneath a crystal chandelier. "No need," I said quietly. "I see my family now." I walked through the restaurant, forcing my shoulders back and my chin up. The other diners were a blur of expensive fabrics and jewelry that caught the light. All I could focus on was Morgan's face as she spotted me approaching. The momentary widening of her eyes before her lips curved into what anyone else might mistake for a welcoming smile. "Mary, what a surprise," she cooed as I reached their table. Arnold turned, his expression shifting from confusion to that familiar look of conflict. He stood halfway, an awkward half-rise that spoke volumes. "Surprise?" I echoed, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I thought I was expected." Morgan's perfectly manicured hand fluttered dismissively. "Oh dear, there must have been some miscommunication. We couldn't possibly have forgotten to include you." But her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, told me exactly what I needed to know. This wasn't an accident. This was carefully orchestrated public humiliation. "The maître d' says my name isn't on the reservation list," I said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. Morgan's sisters-in-law exchanged glances. Arnold's sister Bethany at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, while Vivian, always Morgan's ally, simply sipped her champagne with barely concealed amusement. "Well, that's strange," Morgan replied, her voice dripping with false concern. "I could have sworn I told Arnold to add you." All eyes turned to my husband, who suddenly became very interested in his water glass. I thought you handled the reservation, Mother." And there it was, The moment I realized that not only had Morgan deliberately excluded me, but Arnold knew. He knew, and he'd said nothing. He'd gotten dressed in our home, kissed me goodbye, and come to his mother's birthday dinner knowing I'd arrived to find myself publicly unwelcome. "Well," Morgan continued, gesturing to the fully occupied table. "As you can see, we're all settled in. The restaurant is quite busy tonight. I don't think they could accommodate another chair even if we asked." I stood there, surrounded by people who'd known me for 7 years, watching them collectively decide that my humiliation was acceptable collateral damage in Morgan's little power games. In that moment, something inside me cracked open, not breaking, but awakening. A dormant strength that had been sleeping far too long. "Happy birthday, Morgan," I said quietly. And instead of retreating as they all clearly expected me to do, I turned toward the front of the restaurant, a plan already forming in my mind. Let them think they'd won. For now. I could feel their eyes. On my back as I walked away from the table. Morgan's smug satisfaction. Arnold's cowardly relief. The mixed reactions of everyone else. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but something else was bubbling up inside me. Anger? Yes, but more than that. Resolve. You know that moment when you've spent years trying to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be, and suddenly realize you've been shrinking yourself for people who'll never appreciate it. That's where I was. Standing in the middle of Le Ciel, feeling simultaneously humiliated and strangely liberated. I paused, my hands curling into fists at my sides as I took a steadying breath. Then, instead of heading toward the exit as they surely expected, I turned back. Morgan's face when I reapproached their table was priceless, a brief flash of irritation quickly masked by that society smile she'd perfected over decades of country club luncheons. "Forget something, dear?" she asked, her voice honey-sweet with victory. "Actually, yes," I replied, my voice steady despite the rapid thumping of my heart. "My dignity. And I've just remembered exactly where I left it." Arnold shifted uncomfortably, in his seat. "Mary," he began, his tone placating, "maybe we should discuss this at home." "Discuss what, Arnold?" I asked, cutting him off. "The fact that your mother deliberately excluded me from her birthday dinner? Or the fact that you knew and came anyway?" Morgan's laugh tinkled through the air, that practiced sound she used when wanting to diminish someone. "Now, Mary, don't make a scene. It's so common." That word, common, hung in the air between us. How many times had she used it about me? My clothes were common. My education was serviceable but common. My family background was respectable, I suppose, but rather common. Always with that same condescending smile, as if she were doing me a favor by merely acknowledging my existence. "You know what's common, Morgan?" I said, my voice low but clear. "Insecurity disguised as superiority. That's not just common, it's cliché." The table fell silent. Arnold's sister Bethany nearly choked on her wine. Morgan's face tightened, her eyes narrowing to slits. "I think you've had too much to drink, Mary, though how that's possible when you've just arrived." She turned to Arnold. "Perhaps you should take your wife home. She's clearly not feeling herself tonight." Arnold looked at me, then at his mother, then back at me. That familiar dance of divided loyalty I'd witnessed 100 times before. And as always, he chose the path of least resistance. "Mary," he said, half rising from his chair again, "let's not ruin Mother's birthday." I stared at him. This man I'd given 7 years of my life to, who'd never once stood up for me against his mother's subtle cruelties and not-so-subtle exclusions. "I'm not ruining anything, Arnold," I replied. "Morgan planned this evening perfectly, right down to the humiliation she knew I'd feel when the maitre d' told me I wasn't on the guest list." Morgan's smile remained fixed, but her knuckles were white around her champagne flute. "Such imagination," Arnold always did say you were creative. She turned to the table at large. Mary writes little stories, you know. Charming little tales she hopes to publish someday. The condescension in her voice as she reduced my literary ambitions to a cute hobby made my blood boil. 7 years of these little cuts. 7 years of Arnold standing by, watching it happen. Actually, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded, I have something much more interesting than stories to share tonight. Morgan's smile faltered just slightly. I'm sure whatever it is can wait for a more appropriate time. I don't think so, I replied. In fact, I think this is exactly the right time and place. I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes now. Good. For years she'd held all the power in our relationship, controlled the narrative, set the rules, determined my worth based on criteria I could never meet. But tonight, something had shifted. Arnold reached for my arm. Mary, please. I stepped back from his touch. No, Arnold. For once in our marriage, you're going to listen without your mother telling you what to think. A hushed silence fell over our corner of the restaurant. Morgan's friends at nearby tables were trying hard to pretend they weren't eavesdropping, but I could see them straining to catch every word. This is exactly what I mean, Morgan hissed, her facade cracking slightly. No class. No understanding of how things are done in proper society. I laughed, a genuine laugh that felt like releasing a pressure valve. Proper society? Is that what this is? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a sad group of people who measure their worth by how effectively they can exclude others. Morgan's face flushed red. You've never understood our world, Mary. You've never belonged here. Arnold may have married beneath him, but that doesn't mean we have to pretend. Mother, Arnold interjected, finally finding his voice, though his eyes darted nervously around the restaurant. Please, not here. Too little. Too late. 7 years. Too late, in fact. I straightened my shoulders and took a deep breath. You're right about one thing, Morgan. I don't belong here. Not at this table, not in this farce of a family celebration. But not for the reasons you think. I turned to the maitre d', who had been hovering discreetly nearby, clearly monitoring the situation. Excuse me, I called to him. Could you please tell Lucas that Mary Chambers is here? The look of confusion on Morgan's face was worth every second of humiliation I'd just endured. Mary Chambers? She repeated, her brow furrowing. Who is... My maiden name, I replied simply, watching as the first seed of doubt bloomed in her eyes. The maitre d' nodded and moved toward the back of the restaurant, while I stood my ground, feeling the momentum shift with every passing second. What exactly do you think you're doing? Morgan demanded, her voice losing some of its practiced poise. I smiled, not her calculated social smile, but a real one that came from somewhere deep and authentic. I'm introducing myself properly. After 7 years, it's about time, don't you think? The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Lucas emerged from the kitchen doors. He hadn't changed much in the decade since I'd worked under him. Still tall, and imposing with salt and pepper hair and those keen eyes that missed nothing. He scanned the dining room, and when his gaze landed on me, his serious expression broke into a genuine smile. Mary Chambers, he called, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. My God, is that really you? I couldn't help but smile back, as he strode across the dining room, commanding attention with every step. Lucas had that effect. When he entered a room, you noticed. Hello, Lucas, I said, feeling a wave of nostalgia as he reached me and pulled me into a warm embrace, not caring about the formal atmosphere of his own establishment. It's been too long, he said, holding me at arm's length to look me over. What, 8 years now? Almost 10. I corrected him, acutely aware of Morgan's confused stare burning into my back. Lucas shook his head in disbelief. And you didn't tell me you were coming? I would have prepared something special. The best table in the house for my star pupil. I could practically hear Morgan's jaw hit the floor behind me. Lucas turned his attention to the table, his eyes taking in the scene. With the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent decades reading people across dining rooms. "And who do we have here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd already assessed the situation perfectly. I turned back to face the table. "Lucas, this is my husband Arnold Porter, his mother Morgan, it's her birthday today, and the rest of the family." Lucas, ever the consummate professional, extended his hand to Morgan. "A pleasure to meet you, madam. Any family of Mary's is welcome at Le Ciel." Morgan took his hand automatically, social training kicking in despite her obvious confusion. "You know my daughter-in-law?" Lucas laughed. That full-bodied laugh that had echoed through the kitchen during particularly chaotic service nights. "Know her? Mary was my protégée for nearly 5 years. One of the most talented chefs I've ever had the privilege to mentor." The shocked expressions around the table would have been comical if they weren't so revealing. In 7 years of marriage, not once had Arnold's family bothered to ask about my life before I met him. They'd created their own narrative. That I was some opportunistic nobody who'd snagged a wealthy husband and clung to it regardless of reality. "Chef?" Arnold repeated, looking as though someone had just told him the earth was flat. "Sous chef, actually," I corrected. And that was a while ago now. Lucas waved his hand dismissively. "Always so modest. Mary could have taken over this kitchen in a heartbeat if she'd wanted to. I offered her the position when I was expanding to our Paris location." Morgan's eyes darted between us, her carefully constructed reality visibly crumbling. I thought you worked as a waitress before meeting Arnold," she said, her voice faint. I couldn't help but laugh. "Is that what Arnold told you?" All eyes turned to my husband, who suddenly looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "I might have simplified things," he mumbled. "Simplified?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Mary graduated top of her class from Le Cordon Bleu, worked in 3 Michelin-starred restaurants across Europe before joining my team. She helped develop the very menu this restaurant built its reputation on." I watched as realization dawned across Morgan's face, not just about my background, but about what this meant for the power dynamic she'd so carefully maintained. All these years, she'd positioned me as an outsider, someone who should be grateful for entry into their world. And all these years, I'd had my own world that, in many ways, outshone hers. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Arnold's sister Bethany asked, looking genuinely bewildered. "I did, many times." I shrugged. "No one ever listened." Lucas clapped his hands together decisively. "Well, this won't do at all. Mary Chambers, or Porter I should say, sitting with family and not being properly celebrated. Pierre," he called, to the maitre d'. "Bring champagne, the Dom Perignon rosé we've been saving, and clear my private table. The corner booth." Morgan's eyes widened in recognition. The corner booth was famously the best seat in the house, reserved for celebrities and visiting dignitaries. "Oh, that's not necessary," I began, but Lucas cut me off with a wave. "Nonsense. It's been too long, and clearly your family doesn't know what a treasure they have in their midst." He turned to the table. "Mrs. Porter, I understand it's your birthday. I insist you all join us. Any mother-in-law of Mary's deserves the very best Le Ciel can offer." I couldn't have scripted it better myself. Morgan was trapped by her own social rules. Refusing would be unseemly. Accepting meant acknowledging my status. Arnold stood awkwardly. "Lucas, that's incredibly generous." "Not generous at all," Lucas interrupted smoothly. "It's how we treat family here, and Mary is family." That word, family, hung in the air, weighted with meaning. In one simple statement, Lucas had reframed everything, placing me at the center of a world Morgan had tried so hard to exclude me from. As the staff began rearranging the private booth to accommodate us, Lucas pulled me aside, speaking quietly. "I didn't know you married into the Porter family. Quite the financial empire they've built." I smiled slightly. "There's a lot about my marriage that would surprise you, Lucas." He studied my face with the same intensity he used to assess a complex dish. "Are you happy, Mary? Really happy?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. In the kitchen, Lucas had never tolerated deflection or half-truths. "I thought I was," I replied honestly. Or, "I thought I would be eventually." He nodded slowly, understanding more than I'd said aloud. "Well, whatever path you choose, you always have a place here. My offer still stands. Anytime you want back in the kitchen, just say the word." As we rejoined the others, I caught Morgan watching us, calculation replacing her earlier shock. She was regrouping, trying to find a way to regain control of the situation. But something fundamental had shifted. Not just in how she saw me, but in how I saw myself. For years, I'd been playing a game by rules she'd created, on a field tilted in her favor. But now we were on different terrain, and for the first time, I wasn't the outsider struggling to belong. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As the staff escorted us to Lucas's private booth, the most coveted seating in the restaurant, I could feel the shift in energy among our party. Arnold's sisters were suddenly looking at me with new interest, their husbands asking questions about my culinary background with genuine curiosity. Arnold himself seemed caught between pride and confusion, as if realizing he'd been married to a stranger all these years. Only Morgan remained unmoved, her jaw set in that way I recognized all too well. She was regrouping, seeking a new angle of attack. The private booth was everything you'd expect from Le Ciel's most prestigious table, secluded yet with a perfect view of both the restaurant and the city skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. A fresh arrangement of white orchids graced the center, and the table settings gleamed under the soft lighting. "Your usual wine preference, Mary?" Lucas asked as we settled in. Before I could answer, Morgan interjected, "Mary typically enjoys whatever Arnold orders for her. She's still developing her palate for fine wines." I met Lucas's eyes, and the slight quirk of his eyebrow told me he caught the intended slight. During my years working with him, I'd helped develop the restaurant's wine pairings, spending countless hours with sommeliers, learning to distinguish the subtlest notes. "Actually," I replied, "I think the Chateau Margaux 2010 would pair beautifully with tonight's menu. Unless the chef has changed his approach to the duck confit?" Lucas's smile widened. "Not one bit. Your memory serves you well." He turned to the sommelier hovering nearby. "The Margaux, Jean. And bring the chef out when he has a moment. He'll want to greet Mary." Morgan's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line as the sommelier departed with a respectful bow in my direction. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, recalibrating her approach. "So," she said after a beat of silence, "you were a cook before meeting Arnold. How industrious." "Chef," Lucas corrected firmly. "And not just any chef. Mary helped earn this restaurant its second Michelin star." Morgan waved a dismissive hand. "Well, that's a lovely hobby history. Though I suppose once you married into the Porter family, such work became unnecessary." There it was, her attempt to reframe my achievements as quaint prehistory, something I'd naturally abandon once granted entry to her superior world. "It wasn't a hobby, Morgan," I replied evenly. "It was a career I was passionate about. And very successful at," Lucas added. "I still tell stories about the night Mary saved service after our pastry chef collapsed with appendicitis, created a new dessert menu on the spot that critics still talk about." Arnold leaned forward, something like genuine interest flickering across his face. "I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know," I said quietly, meeting his eyes. "You never asked." A A flash of guilt crossed his features before he glanced away. How had we spent 7 years together without him ever really seeing me? The sommelier returned with the wine, presenting the bottle for my inspection before pouring. I went through the ritual Lucas had taught me years ago, examining the label, approving the cork, swirling the first taste to release its bouquet. "Perfect," I pronounced, noting Morgan's poorly concealed surprise at my confidence. As the sommelier poured for the table, the executive chef emerged from the kitchen. Michel, a French culinary genius who'd been Lucas's right hand during my time at Le Ciel. His face lit up when he spotted me. "Mary Chambers," he exclaimed, hurrying over. "Mon Dieu, the prodigal daughter returns." He kissed both my cheeks enthusiastically. "Lucas just told me. Why did you not warn us? We would have prepared your famous chocolate soufflé," I laughed, genuinely touched by his welcome. "It's wonderful to see you too, Michel." "You must come back to the kitchen before you leave," he insisted. "The new team would not believe me when I tell them about your legendary seafood bouillabaisse." Morgan cleared her throat delicately. "It seems my daughter-in-law has been hiding quite the colorful past from us." Michel looked at her with undisguised surprise. "Hiding? Mais non. Mary's talent was never hidden. Her work was featured in Food and Wine, Bon Appétit. She was even on that television cooking competition. What was it called?" "Rising Star Chef," Lucas supplied. "Made it to the finals." Arnold's head snapped up. "Wait, that was you? The cooking show you watch reruns of sometimes?" I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of amusement and sadness that my own husband could have watched me on television without recognizing the person he married. "I don't recall you mentioning any of this during our family gatherings," Morgan said, her tone suggesting I'd been deliberately deceptive. Michel looked puzzled. "But it is impossible not to know. Even now, some customers still ask for Chef, Mary's special menu from when she did guest appearances after the show." The chef was inadvertently dismantling years of Morgan's narrative about me, and doing it with such innocent enthusiasm that she couldn't even accuse him of being rude. "Perhaps," Morgan began, visibly scrambling for control. Mary felt these achievements weren't relevant to her new life as a porter. Or perhaps, I countered gently, no one in the Porter family ever expressed interest in who I was before I met Arnold. A weighted silence fell over the table. Bethany, at least, had the grace to look embarrassed. Lucas, sensing the tension, skillfully redirected the conversation. "Well, their loss has been the culinary world's ongoing topic of speculation. Many of us still wonder when Mary might return to her true calling." "Return?" Morgan repeated, alarm flashing across her face. "But Mary is fully occupied with her charity luncheons and supporting Arnold's work. That's her priority now." I took a slow sip of wine, letting the rich flavor roll across my tongue before responding. "Actually, I've been considering some new projects recently." Arnold's brow furrowed. "You have? You never mentioned—" "Like I said," I interrupted softly. "You never asked. The first courses arrived then, an elegant arrangement of seasonal appetizers that Michel had customized for our table. As the conversation turned to the food, I watched, Morgan struggling to adjust to this new reality where her carefully constructed narrative about me was crumbling with each revelation. For 7 years, she'd successfully painted me as a social climber, someone who should be grateful for the Porter name and wealth. Now, faced with undeniable evidence of my own accomplishments and connections, she was floundering. "The restaurant. Business is so volatile," she commented after a while, attempting to regain footing. "So much effort for such uncertain returns. Not at all like Arnold's investment work, building real, lasting wealth." And there it was, her pivot to the one area where she still believed the Porter family held unquestionable superiority: money. I smiled, meeting Lucas's eyes briefly. He knew me well enough to recognize that particular smile, the one that appeared when I was about to execute a perfect plating after hours of meticulous preparation. "Speaking of investments," I said casually, Lucas, did that venture in Napa? Valley work out? The vineyard concept we discussed before I left? Lucas grinned. Work out? Mary, it's now our most profitable subsidiary. Your suggestion to combine the restaurant experience with the vineyard tours revolutionized our approach. You consulted on a vineyard investment? Arnold asked, looking increasingly like a man discovering his house had hidden rooms he'd never noticed. Among other things, I replied. I've always had an interest in the business side of hospitality. Morgan's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Well, that's nice, but hardly comparable to managing the kind of capital that Arnold works with daily. I took another sip of wine, letting the tension build just a beat longer before responding. You'd be surprised, Morgan. Sound investment principles work across industries. Mary's being modest again, Lucas interjected. Her investment insights helped us expand from 1 location to 5 in just 3 years. Most restaurant groups never achieve that kind of growth. Morgan's smile was becoming brittle around the edges. How fascinating. Though I imagine such modest ventures feel quite different from handling the Porter family portfolios. And there, it was the opening I'd been waiting for. You know, I said, my voice conversational but clear enough for everyone at the table to hear. I've always found it interesting how people make assumptions about others based on superficial information. Morgan's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean? Just that appearances can be deceiving, I replied. For instance, someone might appear to be merely supporting their spouse's career, when in reality, they're far more involved. Arnold shifted, uncomfortably beside me. Mary. In fact, I continued, someone might even be the primary architect of that career's success, while allowing others to maintain the impression that they're simply along for the ride. A heavy silence fell over the table as my words sank in. Morgan's expression froze somewhere between confusion and dawning horror. What exactly are you suggesting? She asked, her voice unnaturally controlled. I smiled, feeling 7 years of silent acquiescence fall away with each word. I'm not suggesting anything, Morgan. I'm about to tell you exactly who I am and who I've always been. The truth about your son's business success and where it really came from. Because the one thing Morgan Porter had never bothered to discover about me, the one fact that would have changed everything about how she treated me, was about to turn her carefully ordered world completely upside down. The main courses arrived, just as the atmosphere at the table had reached its most tense point. Perfect timing that I suspected wasn't entirely coincidental. Lucas had always had an impeccable sense for dramatic timing in his restaurants. As the servers placed elaborately plated dishes before each of us, Morgan struggled to maintain her composure. The elegant rack of lamb placed before her, normally something she would have commented on extensively, barely received a glance. Mary, she said once the servers had retreated, her voice artificially light. I'm not sure what you're implying about Arnold's business, but perhaps this isn't the appropriate venue for such personal discussions. I smiled, cutting into my perfectly seared duck breast. On the contrary, after 7 years of public slights and carefully orchestrated exclusions, I think this is exactly the right venue. Arnold placed his hand on my arm. Mary, let's not do this here. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how I had spent so many years with a man who was so willing to silence me to keep his mother comfortable. No, Arnold, I said calmly, removing his hand. I think it's time your mother understood exactly who she's been treating as beneath her all these years. Morgan's eyes darted around the restaurant, clearly concerned about appearances. Whatever grievances you think you have, this isn't about grievances, I interrupted. It's about truth, about the narrative you've constructed versus reality. I took a deliberate bite of my food, savoring both the flavor and the mounting tension. 7 years of swallowing my words had built to this moment, and I wasn't going to rush it. Morgan, I continued after a moment. What exactly do you think Arnold's investment firm does? She blinked, thrown by the apparent change of subject. Well, it's a boutique wealth management company specializing in high-growth technology investments, and that's the public description. Yes, I agreed. But I'm asking what you think your son actually does there on a day-to-day basis. Arnold stiffened beside me, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. Morgan frowned. He's the founding partner. He makes the investment decisions, manages the team, builds client relationships. I laughed softly, and she stopped mid-sentence, color rising in her cheeks. Is something amusing? She asked icily. Arnold is indeed the face of Porter Investments, I said, my voice steady. He's excellent with clients, has a great presence in meetings, looks fantastic in the marketing materials. But the investment, strategy, the algorithm that's given the firm its remarkable returns, the decisions about which companies to back? I shook my head. That's not Arnold's work. Morgan's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you a fact that Arnold has carefully avoided sharing with you. I developed the investment algorithm that forms the core of Porter Investments. Success. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade as Morgan stared at me in disbelief. Arnold cleared his throat. Mary has been instrumental to our success, he admitted reluctantly. Instrumental? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that what we're calling it now? Lucas, who had returned to the table during this exchange, looked between us with newfound understanding. So that's why you turned down the Paris position, he said. You were launching a finance company. Among other things, I replied. My culinary background actually informed my approach to the algorithm, looking for unexpected combinations, identifying emerging patterns before they become obvious to the market. Morgan's wineglass hit the table with enough force that the deep, red liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim. This is absurd. Arnold built that company from the ground up with seed money from our family trust. The initial capital did come from the Porter family, I acknowledged. But the intellectual property that turned that seed money into the fortune you're now so proud of? That came from me. I turned to Arnold. Would you like to tell your mother how we really met? Or shall I? His face had gone pale, his eyes pleading. But 7 years of silence was enough. Arnold and I didn't meet at a charity gala, as you've been told, I said, addressing Morgan directly. We met at a venture capital conference where I was presenting my financial algorithm. Arnold was there representing the Porter Family Trust, looking for investment opportunities. I could see the disbelief in Morgan's eyes gradually giving way to horror as the implications began to sink in. Instead of investing in my company, Arnold proposed a merger of sorts, personal and professional. He would provide the capital and the connections. I would provide the technological backbone and strategy. Porter Investments was born from that partnership. Morgan looked to her son for contradiction. But Arnold's silence was confirmation enough. Why would you keep this from me? She finally asked him. Arnold's laugh was hollow. You're asking that? Really? You, who told me my entire life that I needed to be the head of my household, the provider, the success story carrying on the Porter legacy. Morgan flushed. That's different. That's about family values, not... It's about appearances, I interrupted. Just like tonight was about appearances. You've spent 7 years treating me like I was beneath your family, when in reality, I'm the reason your family fortune has tripled since Arnold and I married. Bethany leaned forward, suddenly interested. Tripled? Mother, you said the growth was impressive, but your brother has been very successful. Morgan cut in sharply. We have been successful, I corrected. Together. Though the legal structure of the company might interest you, Morgan. Arnold's hand gripped my wrist under the table, a warning. But I was beyond warnings now. What legal structure? Morgan demanded. I smiled. I own 51% of Porter Investments. The look on Morgan's face was almost worth the 7 years of condescension I'd endured. Shock, disbelief, and a dawning realization that the power dynamic she'd so carefully constructed was built on sand. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Arnold wouldn't—" "It was the only way I would agree to the partnership," I said simply. "My algorithm, my majority control." Arnold agreed because he recognized the value of what I'd created. I turned to Arnold. "Though I suspect you've never told your mother the full extent of our arrangement." Arnold's face had gone ashen. He'd spent years carefully maintaining the illusion his mother needed, that he was the brilliant financial mind, the worthy heir to the Porter legacy. Now that carefully constructed facade was crumbling before his eyes. "It's a partnership," he said weakly. "We're partners." "A partnership where I hold controlling interest," I clarified, feeling strangely calm. The truth, once started, seemed to flow of its own accord. Which was entirely fair, given that I brought the most valuable asset to the table. Morgan's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. This changes nothing. The Porter name is still what gives the company its credibility in the market. The Porter name may have opened doors initially, I acknowledged, but it's my algorithm that keeps them open. The returns speak for themselves. Lucas, who had been following this exchange with increasing interest, raised his glass in my direction. "Always knew you were brilliant beyond the kitchen, Mary. Though I admit, I didn't realize the scope of your talents." "Few people did," I replied. "I preferred to work behind the scenes. It seemed simpler that way." "Simpler for whom?" Bethany asked, her gaze shifting between me and her brother. "For Arnold to take credit for your work?" Arnold flinched. "It wasn't like that. It was a mutual decision." "Was it?" I interrupted gently. "Or did you convince me it was better for business if clients believed the financial wunderkind was the man in the expensive suit rather than his wife?" The painful truth hung in the air between us. Yes, I had agreed to the arrangement initially. Yes, I had told myself it didn't matter who got the public credit as long as we built something successful together. But 7 years of being treated as an accessory by both my husband and his family had hollowed out something essential in me. "All this time," Morgan said finally, her voice unnaturally controlled, "while I've been introducing you as Arnold's wife, you've actually been his boss, technically," I finished for her. "Though we've maintained the illusion of equality externally." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "If what you're saying is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, why reveal all this now? Why publicly humiliate our family?" I felt a genuine laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside me. "Humiliate you? Morgan, do you really not see the irony? You orchestrated tonight specifically to humiliate me, to remind me, yet again, that I don't belong in your world." "That's not," she began. "It is," I cut her off. "You deliberately left my name off the reservation list. You made sure I would be turned away at the door, made to feel unwelcome and excluded, as you've done countless times before." I leaned forward, looking her directly in the eyes. "The difference is tonight I've finally realized I never needed your approval or acceptance. I never needed to belong in your world, because my world has always been bigger than you could comprehend." Morgan struggled to regain her composure, years of social training kicking in. "Well," she said with forced lightness, "this has certainly been illuminating. Perhaps we should finish our meal and discuss family matters at a more appropriate time." "Actually," I said, placing my napkin on the table, "I think I've lost my appetite. And as for family matters, I'm not sure we qualify as family anymore, Morgan." I turned to Arnold, whose face reflected the desperate calculation of a man watching his carefully balanced life collapse. "Did you know about tonight? That your mother deliberately excluded me from the reservation?" His hesitation was answer. Enough, I suspected, he admitted finally. But I thought if I mentioned it, she'd just make a scene, and it would be easier to just handle it later. I finished for him. Smooth things over as you always do. Convince me to forgive and forget, for the sake of family harmony. The pattern was so clear now. Years of small betrayals. Moments where Arnold had chosen the path of least resistance rather than standing by my side. I hadn't seen it clearly until this moment. With the contrast of Lucas's immediate, unquestioning support highlighting just how alone I'd been in my own marriage. Mary, Arnold began, reaching for my hand. We can work through this. We always do. I pulled my hand away. No, Arnold. We don't work through anything. I swallow my dignity and you pretend everything is fine. That's not a partnership, in business or in marriage. The restaurant around us continued its elegant symphony of dining, oblivious to the earthquake happening at our table. Servers glided by with trays of exquisite food, wine glasses clinked at nearby tables, soft laughter drifted through the air, all while my marriage was crumbling into dust before my eyes. You can't be serious, Arnold said, his voice low and urgent. 7 years together, and you're willing to throw it all away over one dinner reservation? I shook my head, a strange calm settling over me. It's not about the reservation, Arnold. It's about what it represents. 7 years of you choosing your mother's approval over my dignity. 7 years of me compromising myself to fit into a world that was never going to accept me. That's not fair, he protested. I've always supported you. Have you? I asked. Or have you just managed me? Kept me placated enough to maintain access to my algorithm and intellectual property while letting your family believe you were the genius behind our success? Morgan, recovering from her initial shock, leaned forward with renewed confidence. Whatever disagreements you two may have, let's remember that Porter Investments operates from family capital. The Porter Trust provided the foundation for everything. I turned to her with a smile that made her confidence waver. Actually, Morgan, there's something else you should know about the company structure. Arnold's face drained of color. Mary, don't... The building where Porter Investments has its headquarters, I continued. I own it outright, purchased before Arnold and I were married, with proceeds from my first algorithm sale. Morgan's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. That's impossible. The Madison Avenue property has been in the Porter portfolio for 3 years, I finished for her. When the previous owner, Westfield Properties, sold it to Chambers Holdings, my private investment vehicle. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas, who had been discreetly giving us space while remaining within earshot, couldn't suppress a low whistle of appreciation. And the penthouse in Tribeca? I continued, warming to my subject now. Also mine. Purchased through Chambers Holdings 6 months before our wedding. Arnold's face had gone from pale to ashen. You told me you were leasing those properties to me at a discount because it made tax sense. Which was true. I nodded. It did make tax sense. For me. Morgan's hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture of distress I'd seen many times before. Usually, when she was confronted with anything that threatened her worldview. But the Porter family has significant real estate holdings. Arnold manages an extensive portfolio. The legacy Porter properties, yes, I acknowledged. But the expansion over the last 7 years? The properties you've been so proud of, Arnold? Acquiring? Those transactions were orchestrated through my holdings company. Arnold slumped back in his chair. I never thought you'd actually tell them. I never thought I'd need to. I replied simply. I always assumed that eventually you'd recognize my contributions and stand up to your family's treatment of me. I kept waiting for you to be proud enough of what we built together to tell the truth. The betrayal I felt went beyond tonight's dinner reservation. It was the culmination of years watching Arnold accept credit for my work. Years of him allowing his family to diminish me while knowing full well that I was the architect of his success. Morgan, ever strategic, was already recalculating, Well, she said with forced brightness, this is certainly unexpected. But ultimately, what matters is that you're both part of the Porter family enterprise. Perhaps we've underestimated your contributions, Mary, but that can be remedied moving forward. I laughed. A genuine, from-the-gut laugh that felt more honest than anything I'd expressed in this family's presence for years. You still don't get it, do you? I said when I could speak again. This isn't a negotiation. I'm not looking for recognition within the Porter family enterprise. I'm done. Arnold straightened, alarm replacing his earlier defeat. What exactly do you mean by done? I said clearly, making sure everyone at the table could hear, that as of tomorrow morning, I'll be instructing my lawyers to begin separation proceedings, both personal and professional. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the gentle clink of Lucas setting down his wine glass. You can't do that, Arnold finally managed. The company will continue under my majority control, I finished for him. As stipulated in our original agreement. Your shares remain yours, of course, but operational decisions revert solely to me upon dissolution of our marriage. Morgan's face had gone white with shock. But that would mean that the Porter family fortune is now largely dependent on my goodwill? I smiled. Yes, it would. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. I've spent 7 years being treated as an accessory in my own life. Tonight was simply the final confirmation that nothing will ever change, not Arnold's willingness to stand up for me, not your perception of my worth. Lucas rose as well, ever the gentleman. Mary, my car is at your disposal if you need it. I nodded gratefully. Thank you, Lucas, for everything. Arnold reached for my arm. Mary, please. We can talk about this at home. Don't make rash decisions based on one bad night. I gently removed his hand. It's not one bad night, Arnold. It's 7 years of nights just like this one, where I compromised my dignity and you compromised your integrity. We've both lost ourselves in this marriage. The difference is, I've found myself again. The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath as I stood there, poised between my past and future. 7 years of my life hung in the balance of this moment. 7 years of shrinking myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. You're upset, Arnold said, his voice carrying that placating tone I'd heard so many times before. Let's not make decisions we'll regret. We can work through this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how I'd spent so long with someone who'd never truly seen me. I'm not upset, Arnold, I replied, my voice steady. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly, and what I see is that our marriage has been a business arrangement masquerading as a partnership. Morgan, ever the strategist, shifted tactics. Mary, dear, she said, her voice suddenly honeyed with false warmth. Family disagreements happen. We may have had our differences, but surely they can be resolved without such drastic measures. The sudden shift from disdain to desperate accommodation might have been amusing if it weren't so transparent. Now that she understood my financial position, I'd magically become family worth keeping. The time for resolution was years ago, I said simply. Every time you excluded me, every time you belittled me, every time Arnold stood by and let it happen, those were the moments when intervention might have made a difference. I turned to Lucas, who had been watching this unfold with quiet support. Thank you for reminding me who I am tonight. I'd forgotten somewhere along the way. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. The Mary Chambers I knew was never someone who could be diminished for long. I gave him a small smile before turning back to the table. I'll have my lawyer contact you tomorrow, Arnold. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you stayed at a hotel tonight. Arnold's face flushed with alarm. A hotel? But the penthouse is legally mine, I finished for him. as we've just established. Morgan's shock finally gave way to indignation. You can't simply eject my son from his home. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. And I'm choosing to do so with more consideration than you showed me tonight, when you deliberately excluded me from this dinner. I picked up my purse, suddenly feeling lighter than I had in years. You know, Morgan, you've spent 7 years treating me like I didn't belong in your world. The irony is, you were right, but not for the reasons you thought. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means I never belonged in a world where worth is measured by last names rather than accomplishments, where loyalty to family means accepting disrespect, where appearance matters more than substance. I shook my head. That was never my world, and I was a fool to try to make it so. I turned to leave but paused, one final thought occurring to me. Oh, and Morgan? Happy birthday. Consider tonight your gift, the truth, finally unwrapped after all these years. As I walked through the restaurant, heads turned to follow my progress. No doubt tomorrow there would be whispers throughout their social circle about the scene. At Morgan Porter's birthday dinner. For once, I didn't care what anyone thought. Lucas escorted me to the door, signaling for his driver as we reached the entrance. You always did have a flair for the dramatic exit, he said, with a hint of approval in his voice. I laughed, a genuine laugh that felt foreign in my throat after so long. I learned from the best. Remember your resignation from Le Méridien? Chuckled. 3 Michelin stars wasn't worth working for tyrants. Some principles matter more than prestige. His words resonated more deeply than he could know. How long had I compromised my principles for the sake of marital harmony? How many times had I swallowed my pride to maintain the illusion of belonging in the Porter world? As Lucas's sleek black car pulled up to the curb, he turned to me with unexpected seriousness. What will you do now? I took a deep breath of the cool night air, tasting freedom for the first time in years. Reclaim my life, my name, my work. Nodded, understanding without further explanation. The offer to return to the kitchen still stands, though I suspect your talents might be worth more in the financial world these days. Maybe I'll do both, I replied, surprising myself with the possibility. Create a fund specifically for culinary innovations. There's a symmetry to that I find appealing. As I slid into the car's plush leather interior, Lucas leaned down to the window. For what it's worth, Mary, you were always extraordinary. Before the Porter name, during your time carrying it, and you'll be extraordinary after. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from the simple recognition of a truth I'd nearly forgotten. I'd entered my marriage as a complete person, accomplished and confident. Somewhere along the way, I'd allowed myself to be redefined by others' perceptions. Thank you, Lucas, I said sincerely, for the reminder. As the car pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the restaurant. There was no need. That chapter was closing, and ahead lay the blank pages of a story entirely my own. The divorce, proceedings would be complex, the business separation more so. There would be battles ahead. Morgan Porter was not someone who surrendered control easily, and Arnold had built his identity on the foundation of our shared success. But for the first time in years, I felt fully myself. Mary Chambers, not Mary. Porter. Chef. Algorithm designer. Investor. Property owner. A woman who had lost herself in the shadows of someone else's expectations, and was now stepping back into her own light. The city lights blurred past the window as the car navigated through the evening traffic. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and logistics, the practical considerations of dismantling 7 years of shared life. But tonight was for reclaiming my sense of self, one deep breath at a time. 3 months later, I stood in the open kitchen of my newest venture, Equations, a restaurant concept that married my culinary background with my financial expertise. The space hummed with activity as staff prepared for our soft opening, the gleaming surfaces and state-of-the-art equipment reflecting the careful planning that had gone into every detail. "Chef, the investors are here. My sous chef, Eliana," announced from the doorway. I nodded, wiping my hands on a towel. "Show them to the private dining room. I'll be there in 5. The divorce had been finalized with surprising speed. Arnold, faced with the irrefutable evidence of our business arrangement, had opted for settlement rather than public litigation. Morgan, of course, had fought harder, bringing in lawyers who specialized in contesting prenuptial agreements. But the documentation I'd maintained over 7 years had proven airtight. In the end, Arnold retained 30% of Porter Investments, renamed Chambers Analytics, while I maintained controlling interest. The properties remained mine, though I'd allowed him to stay in the Hampton house. It seemed a fair division, given the circumstances. What had surprised me most wasn't the legal battle. I'd been prepared for that. But how quickly Arnold had reverted to his mother's worldview once our marriage ended. In his press statements, he'd positioned himself as the visionary who would continue the firm's legacy despite personal changes. The financial world, aware of where the algorithm had originated, knew better. I smoothed down my chef's jacket, custom-made with chambers embroidered above the heart, and made my way to the private dining room where my investors waited. Lucas was the first to rise when I entered, his face breaking into a warm smile. There she is, the woman of the hour. Beside him sat a diverse group of the culinary and tech world's most influential figures, people who had immediately seen the potential in my concept of combining data-driven analysis with innovative cuisine. "Sorry to keep you waiting," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Final preparations for tonight are underway." "No apology needed," said Sophia Chen, a tech venture capitalist whose support had been instrumental in the early funding rounds. "We were just discussing how remarkably quickly you've brought this concept to life." I smiled, thinking of the sleepless nights and endless planning sessions that had filled the past 3 months. When you've been sitting on an idea for 7 years, execution tends to happen rapidly once you remove the obstacles. There was a knowing murmur around the table. My divorce and the revelations about my role in Porter Investments had made headlines in both the financial and society pages. Speculation had run rampant about what I would do next. Few had expected this, a restaurant that wasn't just about food, but about reimagining the entire business model of fine dining through advanced analytics and sustainable practices. "The reservation algorithm is particularly brilliant," commented James Finch, a restaurant industry veteran. "Using predictive modeling to balance walk-ins with bookings could revolutionize how the industry handles table management." "That's just the beginning," I replied, warming to my favorite subject. "The same principles that made the investment algorithm successful apply here, identifying patterns, optimizing resources, predicting trends before they become obvious to the market." As the discussion continued, touching on everything from our locally sourced supply chain to the innovative profit-sharing model for staff, I felt a sense of completeness that had been missing for years. Here, I wasn't hiding behind anyone's name or reputation. Every aspect of equations reflected my vision, undiluted by compromise. After the meeting concluded, and the investors departed with obvious enthusiasm, Lucas lingered behind. "You look happy," he observed, studying my face with the same careful attention he'd once given to assessing a complex dish. "I am," I replied, realizing with some surprise that it was true. Not just the temporary happiness of a successful launch, but something deeper and more fundamental. For the first time in a long time, I feel aligned. Like all parts of me are working together instead of at cross purposes. He nodded in understanding. Some people spend their entire lives compartmentalizing. The professional self separate from the personal, the public image distinct from the private reality. Integration is rare. And precious, I added. thinking of how exhausting it had been to maintain the fiction of being simply Arnold Porter's wife, while secretly driving the business that bore his name. Lucas glanced around the elegant private dining room, taking in the understated luxury that characterized the entire restaurant. "You've created something remarkable here, Mary. Something entirely your own." "Not entirely my own," I corrected him. "I've learned that true success is collaborative. I'm just not hiding my contribution anymore." A soft knock at the door preceded Eliana's reappearance. "Chef, we're ready for final tasting before service," I nodded. "Be right there." As she disappeared, I turned back to Lucas. "Duty calls," he smiled. "Always did, even when you were pretending it didn't." We walked together through the restaurant, which was coming alive with pre-service energy. Staff arranging flowers at precisely the right height, bartenders preparing signature cocktails, hosts reviewing the evening's reservations on tablets, loaded with my custom software. "Will you stay for dinner?" I asked as we approached the front entrance. Lucas shook his head regretfully. "Can't tonight, meeting with potential investors for the Tokyo expansion. But I'll be back for a proper meal soon. I want the full experience." "I'll save you the best table," I promised. As he left, I turned back to survey what I'd built in just 3 months. Not just a restaurant, but a statement of identity. Every element, from the menu that combined classic techniques with data-driven innovation to the staff structure that rewarded collaboration over hierarchy, reflected lessons learned during my years of compromise. "Chef, we're ready when you are." Eliana called from the kitchen doorway. I took a deep breath, savoring this moment of transition, the final preparations before sharing my vision with the world. "Coming," I replied, already mentally shifting into service mode, that familiar state of focused flow that had been my first professional love. As I moved through the kitchen, tasting sauces and adjusting presentations, offering guidance where needed and praise where deserved, I felt completely in my element. This, the creation, the collaboration, the controlled chaos of excellence in pursuit of a shared goal, this was who I had always been. 7 years ago, I had packed away parts of myself to fit into someone else's narrative. Tonight, I was reclaiming every piece, integrating every skill and passion into something wholly authentic. The soft opening was invitation only. Industry insiders, food critics, financial reporters curious about my pivot from Wall Street to the culinary world. Conspicuously absent were the Porters and their social circle, who had sent numerous unsubtly worded requests for tables, once news of the concept had generated buzz. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. As the first guests began to arrive, I stepped out briefly from the kitchen to welcome them personally. The space hummed with anticipation, the lighting perfect, the music at precisely the right volume to encourage conversation without requiring raised voices. "Mary Chambers," called a familiar voice from near the bar. I turned to find Bethany, Arnold's sister, the one who had shown at least some discomfort during that fateful birthday dinner. "Bethany," I acknowledged, neither warm nor cold. "I don't recall seeing your name on tonight's list." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'm not staying. I just wanted to say something." I waited, curious despite myself. "You were right," she said finally. "About all of it. How we treated you. How Arnold let it happen. I wanted to apologize for my part in it." The sincerity in her voice was unexpected. "Thank you," I said simply. She glanced around the restaurant, taking in the subtle elegance, the clear vision evident in every detail. "This suits you," she observed, "much more than trying to fit into our world ever did." I nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. Sometimes we need to be reminded of who we really are. "Well," she said, adjusting her purse strap nervously, "I won't keep you. I just wanted you to know that. Not everyone in the family thinks you made the wrong choice." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Bethany?" She paused, looking back. "Come for dinner sometime. Properly, with a reservation. I think you might enjoy seeing what happens when someone stops trying to be what others expect and starts being who they truly are. A small smile. I'd like that. As service began in earnest, I moved between kitchen and dining room, orchestrating the experience with the same precision I'd once applied to financial algorithms. Each dish told a story, of tradition reimagined, of unexpected combinations that created something greater than the sum of their parts, much like my own journey. Later that night, after the last guest had departed and the staff had completed their closing duties, I found myself alone in the restaurant, my restaurant. I poured a single glass of champagne and sat at the bar, looking out over the space that represented not just a new business venture, but a reclamation of self. My phone buzzed with notifications, glowing reviews already appearing online, messages from friends congratulating me on the successful opening, even a text from Arnold that I chose to leave unread. Whatever he had to say could wait for another day. Tonight was for savoring this moment of completion. The circle that had begun a decade ago in Lucas's kitchen detoured through the world of high finance and unhappy compromise, and finally returned to a place of integration and authenticity. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the journey, with all its unexpected turns, to the lessons learned through both success and sacrifice, to the freedom that comes from finally, unapologetically, being exactly who you are, and most of all, to beginnings that are all the sweeter for the endings that preceded them.